The whole mess started when Ethan Walker came home from a fishing trip and discovered that part of his own lakefront property had suddenly become the HOA's newest obsession. Ethan had spent years maintaining his quiet stretch of shoreline, paying taxes on every inch of it and keeping detailed records proving exactly where his land began and ended. None of that seemed to matter when a power-hungry HOA president decided the community had a claim to the waterfront. At first, Ethan thought it was just another neighborhood misunderstanding. Bro, if only it had stayed that simple. Within weeks, survey markers vanished, warning notices appeared, and neighbors started treating part of his property like it belonged to the association. The deeper Ethan looked, the more unbelievable the situation became. What nobody expected was that the HOA president's arrogance would eventually leave him stranded in the most humiliating situation imaginable, stuck on a wooden post in the middle of the lake while the entire neighborhood watched. And trust me, that was only the beginning. Ethan Walker had lived on the edge of Silver Creek Lake for nearly 12 years. The property wasn't some giant estate owned by a millionaire. It was simply a peaceful lakefront home he had purchased after years of saving. The shoreline behind his house was the main reason he bought it. Every summer he spent weekends fishing from the dock, maintaining the grass along the water, and enjoying the quiet view that came with owning a small piece of waterfront property. The boundaries had never been disputed. Previous owners respected them. Neighbors respected them. Even county records clearly showed the exact property lines. Everything changed when a new HOA president named Karen Holloway took control of the association. Karen quickly developed a reputation around the neighborhood. She loved inserting the HOA into situations that had never been HOA issues before. Mailboxes, flower beds, boat trailers, fence colors, nothing escaped her attention. At first, most homeowners tolerated it. People figured every neighborhood had that one overly enthusiastic board member who wanted to control everything. But Karen seemed different. The more authority she gained, the more aggressively she used it. The trouble started when the HOA announced plans to build a small lakeside recreation area for residents. On paper, the project sounded harmless. A few picnic tables, a walking path, and a viewing platform overlooking the water. The problem was that Karen wanted the platform built directly on land that belonged to Ethan. When Ethan first heard rumors about the proposal, he assumed someone had made a mistake. After all, county maps clearly showed his property extending all the way to a narrow section of shoreline. There wasn't much room for debate. Yet within days, survey flags suddenly appeared near the water. That was the first red flag. The second came when workers arrived and began taking measurements. Ethan walked down to the shoreline expecting a quick explanation. Instead, he learned that the HOA had already approved plans showing the disputed area as community property. Somehow, somewhere, Karen had convinced board members that the shoreline belonged to the association. Bro, hearing that just blew my mind. Imagine owning land for over a decade and then discovering someone had simply decided it wasn't yours anymore. Ethan immediately contacted the county records office. What he found made the situation even stranger. Every document confirmed his ownership. Every survey matched his deed. Tax records showed he had been paying property taxes on that section for years. There was no ambiguity whatsoever. Armed with copies of the records, Ethan attended the next HOA meeting expecting the misunderstanding to be corrected. Instead, Karen doubled down. She dismissed the documents, questioned old surveys, and insisted the association's information was accurate. Even worse, she managed to convince several residents that Ethan was trying to block a community improvement project out of selfishness. That part was unbelievable. Suddenly, neighbors who had waved to him for years began giving him cold looks. Online neighborhood groups filled with complaints about the mysterious homeowner preventing everyone from enjoying the lake. Most of them had never even looked at the property records. They simply trusted the HOA president. Weeks passed, and the situation became increasingly hostile. New survey stakes appeared. Some disappeared overnight. Temporary markers showed up farther onto Ethan's land each time. It felt less like a property dispute and more like a slow-motion land grab. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon Ethan returned home and discovered several freshly installed signs near the shoreline identifying the area as future HOA recreational property. Not proposed property. Not disputed property. They were acting as if they already owned it. Standing there looking at those signs, Ethan realized something important. Karen wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She genuinely believed that if she pushed hard enough, people would eventually accept her version of reality. What she didn't realize was that Ethan had spent his entire professional career working as a marine construction contractor. He understood property boundaries, permits, and waterfront regulations better than almost anyone in the neighborhood. And if Karen wanted to turn this into a battle over lakefront land, she had just picked the worst possible person to challenge. The HOA president thought she was nearing victory. For in reality, she had just taken the first step toward a public humiliation nobody in the neighborhood would ever forget. The weeks that followed transformed an annoying property dispute into a full-blown neighborhood war. Instead of backing off after Ethan presented official records, Karen became even more aggressive. The HOA began distributing newsletters showing artist renderings of the future lakeside recreation area, and every single image included the section of shoreline that legally belonged to Ethan. It was as if the association had collectively decided that reality no longer mattered. At first, Ethan stayed patient. He gathered documents, spoke with county officials, and hired an independent surveyor to verify the boundaries once again. The results came back exactly as expected. The disputed land was unquestionably his. The surveyor even placed highly visible markers along the property line so there would be no confusion. A few days later, several of those markers mysteriously disappeared. That was the moment Ethan stopped viewing the situation as a misunderstanding. The situation became even stranger when residents started using the shoreline as if it were already HOA property. Families wandered across the area. People left chairs near the water. Someone even tied a small boat to part of Ethan's dock without permission. Karen had created an atmosphere where neighbors believed ownership was whatever the HOA president claimed it was. I genuinely couldn't believe what happened next. Ethan installed several cameras facing the shoreline. Within a week, the footage captured multiple incidents of people removing markers, moving boundary stakes, and entering restricted portions of the property. More importantly, one recording showed HOA representatives inspecting the land while discussing future construction plans despite having no legal authority to do so. Then Karen made a huge mistake. Confident that the project would move forward, she scheduled a public shoreline inspection event for HOA members. Residents gathered near the lake while Karen proudly explained where future amenities would be built. The entire presentation took place on land she did not own. What Karen didn't know was that Ethan had already shared his evidence with county officials and a property attorney. While she was busy celebrating, formal complaints were quietly moving through the proper channels. The tension across the neighborhood became impossible to ignore. Neighbors picked sides. Rumors spread daily. Some believed Ethan was hiding something. Others started questioning why Karen refused to acknowledge official records. Every new development seemed to raise the stakes. And right in the middle of all that chaos, Karen announced that construction planning would begin within days. She thought she was forcing Ethan into surrender. Instead, she was walking directly into the trap that would eventually leave her stranded, embarrassed, and desperately wishing she had respected a simple property line from the beginning. Construction planning day arrived, and Karen treated it like a victory parade. She gathered HOA board members, several supportive residents, and a few contractors near the disputed shoreline. The goal was to showcase where the future recreation area would supposedly be built. Karen acted as though ownership had already been settled. What nobody realized was that Ethan had spent the previous weeks preparing for this exact moment. As a marine construction contractor, he knew every permit requirement surrounding lake structures. More importantly, he knew that a series of old wooden survey posts extending into the shallow water marked a legally protected boundary that could not be altered without authorization. County officials had already been notified about the HOA's activities, and investigators were monitoring the situation. 6. Karen, eager to impress everyone, decided to personally lead part of the inspection. She climbed onto one of the large wooden boundary posts near the shoreline to get a better view of the area she claimed belonged to the HOA. Then karma arrived. The water level around the lake had risen slightly during the week, leaving the post isolated from the shore by several feet of muddy water. Karen had confidently stepped onto it during the inspection without paying attention to her surroundings. By the time she finished her presentation and tried to step back, she realized she couldn't safely return without slipping into deep mud and water. Bro, this part was unbelievable. The HOA president, who had spent months claiming ownership of someone else's land, suddenly found herself stranded on a wooden post sitting directly on the property she didn't own. Residents watched as county officials arrived to review the complaints Ethan had filed. The timing couldn't have been worse for Karen. There she was, stuck in plain sight while officials examined records, permits, surveys, and evidence showing the HOA had repeatedly ignored legal boundaries. For nearly an hour, she remained perched on that post while the truth unraveled around her. And as embarrassing as that scene was, the legal consequences that followed were about to be far worse. The investigation moved quickly after that day. County officials confirmed Ethan's ownership beyond any doubt, and the HOA was ordered to abandon all plans involving the disputed shoreline. Several unauthorized signs were removed, construction proposals were cancelled, and the association was forced to cover legal and administrative costs created by the dispute. Karen's reputation never recovered. Residents who had supported her began questioning how such an obvious mistake had been allowed to continue for months. Before long, she resigned from her position as HOA president. 7. Meanwhile, Ethan finally regained the peace he had spent months fighting to protect along his lakefront property. Looking back, this story proves that entitlement can only carry someone so far before reality catches up. Karen tried to claim land that was never hers, and the outcome became neighborhood legend. Honestly, that's exactly how arrogance backfires in real life. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and stick around for more unbelievable HOA karma stories.